welcome everyone again back to the event. Very warm welcome to our online audience. Thank you so much for joining us as well. I'm very excited about actually this session and our amazing panelists joining us in a very few minutes and sharing their experience about building healthy culture in a hybrid organization. But before that, I wanted to actually share with you kind of quick framework how to think about building healthy organization in a little bit more like systematic way. So at Slido, we have been always a big believers in the importance of a healthy culture. And we very much believe that great companies can only achieve great results in the long term if you build strong and healthy foundations. And this is more true than ever, especially in these days when people have a lot of flexibility where to work, and it's so easy to actually go to work for a better company somewhere else if you don't provide this healthy organization, right? So healthy organization really leads to sustainable business results. So there is one really great quote that I would like to kind of show you today from Patrick Lencioni, who is one of these famous leadership authors, and he says that the health of an organization is the single greatest factor determining on an organization's success. And I could not agree more. What he's saying is that a healthy organization has much less politics and confusion. It has higher morale and productivity. There is lower employee turnover and lower recruiting costs. But most importantly, ultimately, healthy organization has also higher trust and resilience in difficult times. And I think especially in these times that we all go through right now, resilience is such an important thing, and trust is such a critical piece of healthy organizations, right? So, but the key question is, how do we systematically build a healthy organization? And again, we will hear from our amazing panel in just a few minutes. So I'm very excited to hear about their lessons and how they are building the healthy culture in their organizations. But let me share you a quick framework that can help you think about building your organization in a simple way. So there are really, like, no matter what the size of your organization or type of your organization, there are three key pillars that you need to be aware of any healthy organization. The number one, really important one, and Craig and Arlen have been talking about this before the break, is the open communication, right? Making sure that people know what's going on. They feel safe to contribute with their ideas, to raise their voice, raise their concerns, but most importantly, that information flows freely and openly across the organization, whether it's vertically or horizontally, to make sure that everyone kind of knows and is able to contribute to the organization's success, right? The second key pillar is inclusive collaboration. So really making it easy for people to collaborate together, allowing everyone to contribute to the success of the organization, no matter where they are located, right? And this is so important if you want to maximize the potential of your talent in your organization, because otherwise they will go somewhere else, right? And then the third key pillar, so important and very difficult, especially in these remote times, is creating this sense of community, creating a common sense of purpose and belonging across the organization, bridging that gap between the people who are working remotely and the people who might be working from the office. But these pillars are not easy, right? They're not easy to build. They take time and they take intentional effort to build. And you can't just say, okay, I'm going to be building open communication. You actually have to use and put together different frameworks and tools to achieve that. And there are really three foundational layers that allow leaders to do this. At the bottom, the foundation of any kind of healthy organization is really the environment, the workplace that we have set up to work. Just think about, do you have closed offices or like an open collaboration space like this one? It's a very different impact on the feeling, on the interactions that people have among themselves, right? Then within this workplace, what are the tools and what are the systems that we are giving to our people to actually to be able to communicate, collaborate, and interact with each other, right? That's another kind of foundational layer that we as leaders have a big impact and influence on. But ultimately, it is the rituals and processes that are driving the culture, that are driving these pillars in our organization. And really, these three foundational layers are the three layers that we, as leaders, have actually direct impact on, and that help us build these three pillars of healthy organization. And of course, all of this is foundationally supported by the shared values we have our company, by the mission vision, that why our company actually exists, and by the strategic clarity so our people know where we are going and why we are doing what we are doing, right? But what's changed, right? Why am I talking about this later? And why actually this concept is important and useful for us as leaders? And the one thing that changed for all of us 3 years ago when COVID came was that foundation layer, right? That environment, the workplace has changed totally in the last, it was 3 years ago, right? Like suddenly we went all from a very familiar setup that we had to completely remote setup. And what this meant is that our tools and our systems that we had, and that our rituals and processes that we have designed before for our organizations, and my clicker is making funny. Okay, they just stopped working, right? And as leaders right now, we really have to adapt the tools, and we have to adapt our systems, and we have to redesign our rituals and processes to make them work in this new setup. And that's actually going to be the main topic of our panel here. And with that, I would love to actually welcome our amazing moderator, Hannah, our panelists, Anna and Kelly, to stage to tell us more about their experience. So thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the session, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Lawrence. I work for a plant-based food company here in the Bay Area, and I am delighted to be here today with Anna and Kelly. So why don't we start with some quick introductions. Tell us about your roles and the scope of your roles and how long you've been with your companies.
Sure. Maybe I'll get started. So first of all, I have some introduction thoughts. First of all, I love when I speak on a panel and there's a picture of me from 10 years ago. Does anyone else love that? Like, I'll take it. So my name is Anna Binder. I lead the people team at Asana. I am, next week will be my 7-year Asana-versary. And then just like a personal note, I'm not really in the business of sharing my medical situations in public information, but I have this weird inflammation of the sac around the heart, which does nothing but make me cough. So if you hear me cough, I promise I'm not sick. It's not contagious. This morning, my husband and my doctor said, just keep it calm. And I said, I'm talking about culture. There's no world where I'm going to keep it calm. So I just want to explain myself a little bit. Is that enough of an intro?
That was a great intro. Thank you very much, Kelly.
And I just want to thank you for bringing the human to the conversation. That's such an important part of Gainsight as well. Like, we have a whole purpose around being human first. And sometimes that's what happens. You're a human being, whether you're behind your desk in Zoom or in front of a panel. I'm Kelly O'Blennis. I work at Gainsight. I've been at Gainsight for 7.5 years.
Oh, wow, that long as well. I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
I've been there quite some time. I love it. I'm really passionate. I'm really passionate about what I do, but I'm really passionate about the work that I do at Gainsight. Like, I always kind of half joke that, I love HR. We call it teammate success. I don't know if I would do it anywhere. I would do it at a place where I can actually make impact and feel valued for the work that I do. So 7.5 years is a wild time, especially in this day and age, but it's really flown by for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those intros. And I think that's a fantastic example of showcasing vulnerability and how important it is for leaders to show up in kind of a vulnerable manner, and how important that is for culture as well. So thank you for modeling that for us today. All right, let's learn a little bit more about your companies. I think it's good to kind of level set so that we all understand, what type of company we're talking about. So can you tell us, why don't we start with you, Kelly, how many employees at Gainsight and the general geographical spread?
Yeah, so we're a very global company. We're about 1,300 worldwide. About 60% of our population is located in India. It's all of our product and engineering. And we have one large, beautiful office there in Hyderabad and a smaller one in Bangalore. In the US right now, we are totally remote. So we don't have any offices, and that really changed after the COVID pandemic. Obviously, everyone went starkly to work from home, and we made the strategic decision to stay that way. In the US, we have a presence in EMEA, UK, Netherlands, Israel. We just hired our first 2 employees in Japan. And so our scope is very large, and thinking globally and acting locally or having specific geographic strategies is really important to us. And I will also share our US strategy of being remote, completely remote, started during the pandemic. We were already we had about 4 offices, and we had a few, probably about 30% of our organization that had already worked from home, but people really identified to your office. So you were San Francisco, or you were San Mateo, or you were St. Louis, or Phoenix, or remote. And so we really, and I think we'll probably get into this a little bit later, we really had to figure out how to help people find an identity when you don't have your home, your office, right? How do you continue to connect with people and have fun have fun at work when you're just, in a box on Zoom all day? And like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later. And so we're fully remote. We've experimented with the idea of having a gangster lounge. And that lounge is sort of our own personal co-working space in St. Louis. We said we would experiment with it for a year. We're just on that year, and we're kind of deciding what we're going to do. And then we also offer global access WeWork for any employee who needs it, who for whatever reason can't work from home. Maybe they're in New York City and are in a studio and can't, there are moving to work from home didn't work for everybody immediately. And so we have a good partnership with WeWork, and we try to offer. So our strategy is really to offer flexible and inclusive ways to make sure that you're productive at work without having those core offices.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. Anna, let's go to you.
Can you just, for those in the audience that don't know what Gainsight does or is, can you just explain the product and the
Sure.
customers?
So Gainsight is the customer success company. We help customers grow and build their own customer base, and we do that with our awesome platform.
Great. So Asana is work management or work collaboration. How do you ensure that everybody knows who's doing what by when? From a culture perspective, I think of it as, I think a key driver of engagement is understanding how and why your work matters. So one of the reasons that I love working at Asana is because the premise of the product is to allow you to connect a single task, to a project, to an objective, to a mission, right? Like through what we call the pyramid of clarity. And so that you don't feel, if you have to spend an extra hour at night, or you just got to make that one more phone call to the partner, you don't feel like you're just throwing work away. You understand how that particular task or that hour on your calendar connects with your broader purpose. And I think that we deserve that. So that's what Asana is. We are slightly less than 2,000 people. We're in about 12 countries. Almost all of our international offices are go-to-market offices, so customer-facing, all of the different customer-facing. We have a couple development centers in New York City and in, see, I told you it was going to come, in New York City and in Vancouver, of all places. In terms of how we work, I'm a really big believer that your business strategy needs to be supported. You need to design and build your talent strategy to support your business strategy. So what might work for a plant-based food company, or Gainsight, or Slido, or name any other company, they have different business strategies, so they need different talent strategies. And I also believe that your workplace strategy or your geography strategy only exists to support that talent strategy. So Asana, early in 2020, I think as early as May 2020, we made the decision that while the pandemic was forcing us to really, back then we called it, shelter in place, right? Mm-hmm. We were, the pandemic forced us to do remote work. We would stop remote working as soon as we could. So as soon as the CDC and all the different countries that we were in allowed us to come back into the office, we would. We also recognized that employees had experienced a whole brave new world of flexibility that they really valued. So our middle way was to do something that we called office-centric hybrid. So the vast majority of our roles are located in an office. we have 3 to 4 days of synchronized time in the office together. So it's not a you do you, it's not a choose your days, it is synchronized. And we try to arrange our work around that. So our important, we say big, important decision making, the collaboration, the trust building, those happen in our in-office days. And for us, we there was in the previous session there was like a productivity, a Slido, a poll on productivity, and for us it really wasn't about productivity, right? We were hiring 20 new Asanas every single week for a period of 20 months, and for us the important things were innovation, the important things were trust, the important things were how do you build resilience around a group? If that meant that we were a little less productive because people spent more time commuting or whatever, we were okay with that trade-off. And again, that was for us. That was our talent strategy to support our business goals.
Fantastic. Thank you for those very comprehensive overviews. And I love what you were saying about the business strategy really driving your people strategy. I think that's super important and a great connection to make. So you are both leaders of people teams, people organizations. Do you see yourselves and your teams as the ones who are responsible for culture at your companies? We heard earlier that it's everybody's job to contribute to the culture. Do you think of yourselves as responsible for it?
Yeah, I do. I don't solely feel responsible, but our team and the work that we do, to the point of having your talent strategy be your business strategy. If we believe in bringing programs that actually enable the culture that we're trying to build, so that people can innovate, so that people can grow, so that we can be productive, I do feel a big sense of responsibility for the culture. But I don't feel it solely, and it's not. That's what I said earlier. I don't know if I could do it at any company. You can't be solely responsible for something if you don't have that buy-in from leadership. And if you don't enable your managers, who truly are the biggest window into the employee experience, right? Like, you can have this amazing culture and have a manager that's not connecting to it or isn't producing that same experience. We in this room, we've seen it all the time. People bounce real quick. So it has to be everybody's experience. But yeah, I feel a deep sense of responsibility to make sure that I'm setting a foundation that really works for our organization.
So how much time do we have on this topic? I often say that culture is a full team sport. And it is everyone from the receptionist who's creating an experience, obviously for our employees showing up, but also for our candidates showing up, and for the UPS driver. Like, I want those, that receptionist is a representative of our culture. Obviously, all of the managers, the leadership team, but really also the board, because you can't have it both ways. Your boardroom and your board discussions need to represent your culture, and the culture needs to live in that boardroom as well. So in terms of, I feel deeply responsible, but to me, success is if we're in the executive team meeting, and I'm the one that is reminding people of the cultural implications of a decision or a topic, then I feel like I have failed. I don't want to be that person. My job is to provide frameworks for thinking about it. My job is to convince everyone who's an Asana stakeholder, and frankly, including our customers and partners, that the work that we do to invest in our culture actually helps drive the business outcomes that we're looking for. Culture drives business outcomes, and the business only exists for just one reason, which is to allow us to achieve our mission. So if my job is to make sure that people get that, and if I do that well, I am not the one bringing up the cultural issues. Everybody is thinking about that in across the globe in the 10,000 decisions that they make. You know, another version of that is a lot of board members, people at the board level are like, culture, it's like a squishy, like soft thing. And my job is to bring numbers, math, metrics, and logic to the investments we make. I might not be able to, there are many things that I can measure really well, and there are many insights I get from, for example, Culture Amp as an engagement survey, or even the Perform product. But my job is to make sure that even if I can't measure it as perfectly as my funnel on the sales side, I can demonstrate the value of the investment.
That's fantastic. I'm going to lead the witness a bit here because we did have a prep call.
I forgot to do it. I did it. She said, make sure you talk about this. I said, okay, I might forget.
Might you think about culture as a product?
Yes. So early on, long before I joined Asana, by the way, I joined Asana when we were like 100 employees. So, but the founders had really cared about culture and believed in this premise of culture drives business, which serves to achieve the mission. And they started this concept of culture as a product, which really resonated with me. And then as we grew to be thousands of employees, I took with me on that journey. And the concept is, if you've worked in product development, you start with the end user, the customer. What do you want them to experience? What are the outcomes that you want? How do you want them to feel? What problems do you want to solve? So it is that it's an exercise of deep understanding. It's an exercise of first principles of like, what are we trying to solve? Then the team goes away and builds something and prototypes it and tries some things and learns from other companies like many of you, and then builds like a straw dog, right? Like just a version, for those of you not in this country, a straw dog is like a prototype, a version A. And then like we do when Asana releases product, we then kind of pilot it. And we might start with a group of 50 over here, or a group of a couple hundred. And then we learn, we find some bugs, and we fix those bugs. And then we might roll it out to everyone. As we do that, we continue to learn. Some of the data, the quantitative data out of Culture Amp will teach us, oh, this worked, this had some unintended consequences, some externalities. But it's not just the quantitative. You got to go out and talk to the people and how is it received? And then you evolve it. And you keep doing that over and over and over again. Because your company is changing. The competitive landscape is changing. Everything about what you're doing is changing. So nothing lives in this static world. And I often say to my teammates that work for me on my team, they're like, don't you ever get tired? Wouldn't it be nice if something lasted for 5 or 10 years? And I'm like, that would be terrible. Because that would mean that we weren't changing and growing and evolving as a company for 5 or 10 years. And then we would die and somebody would take over. So.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for that. You mentioned a little bit earlier that you bring metrics and data and facts when you're talking about culture. Could you maybe each give us a couple of examples of what type of measurements you take around culture and if there's any tools that you use that you want to highlight?
Yeah, we do. We've used a variety of different engagement tools, one being Culture Amp, and now we're using Lattice. And it's funny, you say that our strategy around engagement surveys and pulse checking and roundtables is really ever changing. I liked what Craig said earlier about it's not a playbook, right? It's I wish there was a playbook for it, but every year we learn and we change. So we've gone from quarterly check-ins to pulse check-ins, and now this year we're experimenting with one annual, and then we're going to do department-focused check-ins the mid-year. And that's really our tool to measure engagement, collaboration, action, innovation. And we always follow that up with a lot of roundtables and action plans. I believe that having action plans at a company level obviously is great, But where you have the most juice, if you will, where you have the most movement is if you focus on the business units. And so we have our business partners really partner with our executive team to have really specific action planning at the end of each cycle. And then we report on that, after. What did we experiment with? What did we try? How did we do? And what are next steps? And I think when you focus on it, specifically within a business unit, people feel a little bit closer to solving, right? Because action planning doesn't mean some executive or even some manager comes in and says, I have the solution, I'm fixing everything. It's really about feeling connected where everybody's part of the change that you're trying to make in an organization. And so I always like having a lot of action planning and a lot of focus areas done as close to the business unit as possible. And then overlaying that with like a geographical location strategy as well, right? What works in India is really different than the US. And even though a lot of our executive team is based out of the US, we're not an organization that says that means all the decisions come from the US, right? We have a foundation and the right people in place to make the decisions locally at the level. And so we try to really encourage that. Get as close to the problem solving, get as close to the culture as you can.
Excellent. Would you like to share some ways that you use data?
I mean, I'll share two things. Depending on what's going on in the business, I look at different things. But the first thing that I just want to highlight, so at Asana, we have 7 or 8 kind of annual company objectives. And it ranges from, the top line ARR to profitability, some profitability metric to, hearts and minds of IT. So it's just like any company, right? And this year, the 7th one is about, support employees thriving, right? Like engagement, belonging, thriving globally. And if you click down on that, each one has very specific criteria for being measured. And I insist on the engagement one, the culture one, is 50 to 75% of its grading is how we do on the other objectives. Because you can't tell me that you've got a thriving culture if you don't have a successful business, right? Now, some people bellyache and there's so much there that I can't control and blah, blah, blah. Stop. You're a business person who happens to do HR work, but you're doing that HR work and that culture work to support the business. So that's my number one set of metrics, how is the business doing? The second thing is, what do I think is a big problem right now, and what metrics can I look at this quarter, next quarter, this year? Because I think we can become data, addicted to data, and my quarterly people review can start to be 80 slides, and I'm I can't pay attention to 80 slides worth of stuff. And how am I going to ask our executive team to do that? That's crazy. So right now, my pony right now is I want to make sure that we have a culture of high impact, of high performance, and a culture of deep belonging. And I think maybe as a society and as an industry, to all positivity, we've invested a tremendous amount in belonging and inclusion, but some people have weaponized that work and that commitment to say, I can't tell you real talk about why you're not meeting expectations, because that would not be inclusive, and that might hurt your feelings, or that might be whatever. And by the way, that's a really natural thing to do, right? Because all else equal, I don't want to have that tough conversation, right? That's hard, that's yucky, it's going to make me cough. It's terrible. But so right now, I'm very much about giving managers tools to be able to have that conversation, including prompts like, John, the project that you finished last week, or the way you showed up in that meeting, or X, Y, and Z, did not meet my expectations. And here's why, and here's what you can do better, and here's how I can support you. But you gotta use that phrase, right? Like, and yes, of course, I provide the coaching and support to the managers in practice, but then I also have accountability, and I say to managers, if you're not able to go have that conversation, then you're actually not meeting my expectations. And it's not a problem with John, it's a problem with you. And so I have various ways to measure that. And it's just kind of interesting. We now have a quarterly performance management check-in. And one of the things that you have to answer as a manager is Susan meeting your expectations in her role, at her role level right now? So it's very clear. Yes, no, other. And if you write other, you better be ready to write a novella to be able to explain other. But then the interesting thing that we do, for the folks that are marked as no, for the folks that are marked at other, they get a follow-up conversation about accountability. But the folks that are marked as no, we then do an audit of the actual writing that they do on their performance. We don't call it performance, we call it growth and impact. But we do kind of a blind audit to see, is what they've written consistent with a grade or a rating of not meeting expectations? And so I want to, that number's too high. Too many of the folks that are saying not meeting expectations are not using language that supports that. And so, that's all right. We got a baseline, and now we need to get better at it each time. So that's the one I'm focused on right now.
Great. Love that. So I do want to get into some of the pillars that Peter spoke about earlier that support a healthy culture. So I'm going to ask you each different questions to get through these. So we're going to start with communication. And I'm going to ask the sticky question. And I'm going to ask you, Anna, because I know you have an opinion on it. So we've talked about open communication. We've talked about psychological safety today. Anonymous Q&A at town halls. How do you do it?
I have a 15-year-old, so I'm long past the zippers. And one of the most important things that I think I can teach her is to own mistakes and just get over them quickly, as opposed to it's not my fault or blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I say to her is, I make more mistakes by 10 a.m. every single day than you're going to make in a month. So you're in safe place. I was anti-anonymous questions for 20 years. And my team, who are huge Slido fans, really tried. They wanted to bring it in all hands. They wanted to blah, blah, blah. And I said, no. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8, which means my principles get in my way regularly. What does that mean? I was like, if we need to have anonymous questions, we aren't doing our job to create a culture of open and rigorous and direct communication, and we're cheating and hiding. Well, it turns out I was totally wrong because it is scary. It's scary to be up on stage and reveal it, and it's very scary to be in the audience, and life can just be a little bit scary. And if it turns out that if you allow people to ask questions anonymously, and you prove to them and you show them that you will answer their questions as honestly as you know how, as vulnerably as you know how, and as specifically, that actually in turn builds trust. Some people, we talked about it as meeting people where they are. And I think it does require an overlay of editing, right? We definitely just delete questions that have been asked and answered 100 times, or that we think are frankly just inappropriate. And and I think that that's a good middle way. But yeah, I feel like the robustness, is that a word? The robustness of our dialogue with our employees has increased significantly since we started using Slido. So that's just one of the many ways I've been wrong.
To add to that, I couldn't agree more. We definitely allow, and it was a hot debate in our organization too for quite some time, I felt very similarly to you for a while of like, well, are we really creating the right culture if people can't be anonymous? And, we ended up learning that there's a privilege in being at a place in your career where you are, so brazen to just be like, I don't need to be anonymous. Like the people who are earlier in their career, give them space to ask something that they may fear is not going to look like right or isn't going to be perfect. And so we definitely lean in. We allow the anonymous questions. We do, however, moderate all that come in case there's, anything that obviously isn't appropriate and can't go through. But we very rarely, if at all, I think have ever not had a question come through. We've actually leaned into this so much. We just introduced a platform called Vault, and so we really it allows for anonymous feedback and anonymous reporting. And we had this before in like a Google form version, which people probably half trusted, half didn't. But we've really leaned into allowing for anonymous impact and feedback in both our surveys, at our all hands, and also in our culture. We think it's a really important thing to give people the ability to do.
Great. Now I want to talk about the collaboration pillar, and we'll come to you, Kelly, for this. So in the hybrid world, you've spoken quite a bit about essentially not taking a one-size-fits-all approach and honoring local cultures and customs and all of that. And I want to ask you, in a hybrid world, what does inclusive collaboration actually look like?
That's so tough.
You can just skip it.
It looks like, I think at the baseline of it, our entire leadership model is based around psychological safety. And we have this program that we call Human First Leadership, where we train leaders how to create a psychological safe environment where people actually feel like they can take risks. And we believe in doing so, you're going to have better business results and you're going to have more effective teams. So, inclusive collaboration could look like strong business outcomes, strong team achievements. Qualitatively, it can look like feedback that comes in from your engagement survey. And one of the things that we learned during this COVID time and this COVID pandemic was, like I said earlier, we had, we were notorious for the people in the room had the voice. But we always had meetings, right, where you were in the room or you were on the phone. And COVID really taught us and taught me the importance of leveling the playing field in meetings. And when we went to all remote, my team was pretty much based in San Francisco at the time, and I had one teammate in St. Louis. And about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, she called me and she was just like, I've never felt more connected to this team. I love this team. I'm so engaged. I'm so excited. And it was because she had it's sort of embarrassing, actually, to not have had that knowledge before COVID. But now that's something that's so important to us, is we leveled the playing field for almost all of our meetings. And you have your fair square of your box on Zoom, and everybody has a voice. And I think that's, and we encourage always, cameras on to create those connections. But that was a really significant change for us.
Yeah, and I think that can work even in a world where people are working in the office. What I've seen work well is if one person is remote for a meeting, everybody is remote for the meeting. Even if 10 of you are physically present in the building, you're all sitting separately on your computers so that you're not creating an inequitable experience for those who are joining remotely. All right, we are running out of time, but I want to make sure that we hit on that last pillar of community. So which one of these questions do I want to do? I'm going to do this one.
Moderating is hard.
It is hard. So I'm going to do, because we've heard foster belonging and we've heard building community. Are those the same thing? And if not, why are they not the same thing?
I think I always say, there's just a couple real true drivers of engagement, right? Like what I talked about before, do I feel like my work matters, and do I feel like the tasks and projects connect to the broader purpose? A second one, for me is no meeting Wednesdays. So I have an entire day of deep flow, no meeting Wednesdays. It is the single best thing. Okay, maybe after my kid, but it's like really up there. But the third is belonging. And, you know, honestly, the first two anyone can do, right? Like creating connection to the mission, creating space to have deep flow. Those are like, shame on you if you haven't done that. Belonging, I mean, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure that and like nail that. And I think part of it is it means really different things to different people. For some people it is like, I feel connected to this community, and that community might be my immediate team, like your story, or it might be an ERG, or it might be I'm connected to the market, like the whole marketing endeavor. You know, it can mean a lot of different things for people. So I think that they're different. It's belonging can be met through community.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly?
I love that. I really respond to that very well. And, you know, yeah, sense of belonging is really hard. It's really hard in the workplace. And we're still learning new avenues and paths of like what that means for individuals. And, you know, I think if you think you're doing it well, you have to relook at it. You know what I mean? Like we always say, you know, good intentions aren't enough to be inclusive. You don't get to just feel like a good manager. You have to be really specific with your words and specific with the connections you're making and the way that people engage and collaborate in certain meetings. But, you know, we're doing, somebody said it earlier, Autism Acceptance Month. We're actually calling it Autism Awareness Month, and I already slacked somebody to be like, oh my gosh, that's so good. But neurodiversity in the workplace is something we're currently trying to figure out. And to me, that feels like a newer thread of inclusion and belonging that we're all figuring it out. So yes, it's hard, it's wonderful. It's what keeps me interested in the work, though. It's like you're striving, you know you never get there, but you never stop striving.
Awesome. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, so we are going to do one last question to you both, and I'm going to challenge you to answer it in 1 minute. Timer's right there. What advice would you offer to anyone who is managing a shift or an evolution in their company's culture?
Get a Tiger team together. Meet regularly. Like, make it a program, make it a project. We decided our workplace strategy during COVID pandemic very specifically. It sounds like you did as well, even though our companies ended up going in very different paths. You know, don't expect it to happen organically, even if maybe the output feels organic, right? Like, make sure that you're really being strategic in how you are, the decisions you're making, the experiments you're making, and the follow-through and the check-in. Have the right leaders on the team, get the right info, and really just make it a Tiger team.
I believe that writing is thinking. So if you're either experiencing or driving a change, why? What are you trying to solve with the shift that you're trying to make? Write it down. Share it with people. Name the awkward. Name the awkward of, like, name the things that you're going to lose. And then have that as a source of truth that people can go back to, so that there's not, people aren't making up their own stories about it. Everything I learned from leadership comes from the West Wing, and the West Wing, C.J. Craig said, unless you tell them why you're doing something, they're going to make up their own stories, and those stories are not positive.
Amen. All right, I think, do we have time for some audience Q&A? Okay, great. So why don't we start with the top one. What strategies have you used to truly understand what culture issues workers are facing? There's some examples: roundtables, anonymous Q&A, company-wide polling.
It's a very simple answer for us. We do a culture engagement survey twice a year. We select one or two themes company-wide, but then we really go whether it's like the major offices or the functional areas, and we follow up with learnings. And that, select 1 or 2 issue areas, select 2 or 3 things you're going to address, and then give yourself a break from the rest of it.
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit earlier today. We do a similar thing. We probably do all of the above. We also do onboarding surveys for people, so we check in on their experience 30, 60, 90 days in with both the manager and the teammate. But yeah, we're a big engagement survey action planning company as well.
Awesome. One more? Okay, great. One more. Remote workers often feel like they are left out of all the in-person events, but remote events are typically much more expensive to plan. So how do you manage this?
So we took an interesting approach to this, and the economy was really different 1 year ago today, right? So
How was it?
So we had a year ago today, we had this connection strategy of 1 annual company conference a year, quarterly in-person offsites, and then these local events. And this year, they are more expensive, and we're trying to figure it out. But what we haven't let go is our local events. So because we're so distributed in the U.S., we developed a cultural ambassador program where gangsters of critical mass in different areas have a quarterly event. And it's actually still growing, and it's really awesome to see people connect, not because you're on your team, but just because you need that connection and can talk about your experience at the company. And so that's what we're doing this year. While we're not having as many, our teammate budget isn't quite as large as it was last year. We made the intentional decision to continue to invest in our local events for teammates because we think that connection point is really valuable.
Great. I think we'll wrap up there.
Can I just sneak in and say, there's this question that I'm really, really curious about, and you're all leaders, you are listen to your employees, you care about culture, but I would love if you can do a short answer on how can people who know that culture matters convince their leaders that they should care as well? What is your take on that? I know it's a hard one, but I really wanted to throw it in there.
That's so tough. What I want to say is move on. Honestly, if you can't get that buy-in, there's plenty of companies that will fit the mold. You can try. There's tons, there's lots that you can do to be an ambassador in a company that maybe isn't the culture that you want to have. But if it's not the culture you want to have, go find one that is.
Yeah, there's great research out there that you can use for evidence-based pitching or convincing, and I think that's on you to figure out how to do that, and you should take a hard run at it, and you should hold yourself accountable for being excellent at it. And if you can't move the needle, then move on.
Yeah.
What is your opinion?
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with everything that Anna and Kelly said, and I think have a plan as well. When a leader comes to you and says, I'm having issue XYZ, have a plan that shows how improving the culture, how introducing some new tools that support, a more inclusive and open culture would actually help with that specific issue that they're having.
Yeah,
I think that's
get
helpful.
narrow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.